May 4th, 1945. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, Rams, France. General Dwight D. Eisenhower is reviewing German surrender protocols with his Chief of Staff, General Walter Bedell Smith. The war in Europe has days left, maybe hours. The Third Reich is collapsing from every direction. This nightmare is almost over. Then a staff officer enters the room. He's holding a field report. His face is tight. Smith takes the report, scans it, and his expression changes, sir. Smith says, "We have a situation with Third Army." Eisenhower looks up from the surrender documents. "Patton's in Linz." Eisenhower blinks. "Linz? That's in Austria." "That's..." Smith nods slowly. 80 miles past his stop line, sir. "And the Soviets are 30 miles east." The room goes silent. If you're fascinated by the untold stories of World War II, the decisions that shape history, and the moments that never made it into the textbooks, then you're in the right place. This is WWE2 Elite, where we bring you the real stories behind the headlines. Hit that subscribe button, tap the like icon, and drop a comment below, telling us what World War II topic you want us to cover next. Now, let's get into this story. Eisenhower stands up and walks to the wall. His finger traces the line from the Enns River to Linz, 80 miles, through mountainous terrain. Third Army wasn't supposed to move at all. They were holding at the Enns River per explicit orders from Schaeff. Orders that came from agreements made at Yalta in February. Agreements between Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin about occupation zones in post-war Austria. "When did he cross the Enns?" Eisenhower asks. "May 2nd, sir. 0400 hours. No authorization requested." Eisenhower stares at the map. The Enns River was the agreed stop line. Everything east of the Enns was designated for Soviet occupation. That was signed. Delivered to Moscow. "That's impossible," Eisenhower says quietly. "We have explicit agreements with the Soviets about stop lines." Smith pulls out another document. Field Report 3/3-782. Third Army elements secured Linz at 060. Hours May 4th. Bridges intact. 11th Armored Division establishing defensive positions east of the city. Eisenhower does the math in his head. 80 miles in 2 days? That's not a reconnaissance patrol. That's not a tactical adjustment. That's a full army advance into... "The Soviets are expecting to occupy that sector," Eisenhower says slowly. "That was settled in February at Yalta." Smith nods. "Yes, sir. And according to intelligence, the Red Army's 6th Guards Tank Army is 20 miles from Linz." Eisenhower closes his eyes. American forces and Soviet forces are about to meet in Linz, Austria, and nobody coordinated this. Nobody authorized this. Patton just decided to take the city. "Apparently, sir," Smith says carefully. "General Patton interprets stop lines as suggestions." Eisenhower turns from the map. "Get him on the phone. Now." Smith hesitates. "We've been trying, sir. Third Army headquarters says he's at a forward command post. They're having difficulty establishing contact." "Difficulty?" Eisenhower repeats. "Yes, sir." Eisenhower sits back down at his desk. He's the Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe. He answers to Washington, London, and indirectly to Moscow through the combined chiefs. And one of his army commanders just seized a city in the Soviet occupation zone without orders. "Keep trying," Eisenhower says, "and get me everything we have on every unit, every forward element. I want to know exactly where Patton is and what he's doing." Smith salutes and leaves. Eisenhower looks back at the surrender documents on his desk. Germany is about to surrender unconditionally. The war is about to end, and Patton just started and Patton isn't answering his phone. It takes 4 hours. 4 hours of radio calls, field telephone relays and messages passed through Third Army headquarters before Eisenhower finally gets Patton on the line. It's 1400 hours. May 4th. Patton is at his forward command post, in Linz itself. "George," Eisenhower says, and his voice is cold. "What the hell are you doing in Linz?" "You were ordered to hold at the Enns River." There's a pause. Then Patton's voice comes through, crackling over the Ike. The bridges were intact. The Germans were retreating east. Someone had to secure the area. The Soviets were supposed to secure that area. "We have signed agreements." Stalin is already sending messages through Marshall about American units in the Soviet occupation zone. "Well, like," Patton says, and there's that familiar tone in his voice, unapologetic. "I figured possession is 9/10 of the law. We're here. We took it without firing a shot." The local population is actually relieved to see us instead of the Red Army. Eisenhower rubs his forehead. This isn't about tactics, George. This is diplomacy. We're trying to build a post-war alliance with the Soviets. You've just driven a tank column straight through that alliance. With respect, sir, if we're building an alliance, we should negotiate from a position of strength. Right now, we're in Linz. They're not. That's strength. George, Eisenhower says, and his voice drops. I need you to understand something. President Roosevelt is dead 3 weeks. Truman is trying to establish credibility. The entire post-war order is being negotiated right now, and you've just made my job as Supreme Commander infinitely harder. I need you to hold your current position and prepare to withdraw if ordered. There's silence on the line. Then Patton speaks again. Withdraw? His voice is sharp. Ike, these are American positions now. My men took this grab. They bled to get here. Your men weren't authorized to be there in the first place. Another long silence. Eisenhower can hear voices in the officers talking. Radio chatter. Understood, sir? Patton finally says. Third Army will hold current position. George, I'm serious about this. Do not. The line clicks. Patton has hung up. Eisenhower slowly puts down the receiver. Bedell Smith is standing in the doorway. How did it go, sir? He hung up on me, Eisenhower says. Get me a direct line to General Marshall in Washington and find out everything you can about Soviet positions in that sector. If their forward elements run into Patton's armor, this could get very bad, very fast. Smith nods and leaves. Eisenhower sits alone in his office, staring at the map on the wall. Linz, 80 miles past the stop line, and Patton isn't backing down. The next morning, May 5th, the situation escalates. Soviet Marshal Fyodor Tolbukhin sends an urgent communication to SHAEF headquarters. Red Army units approaching Linz from Czechoslovakia have encountered American armored forces. Tolbukhin demands immediate clarification of American positions and intentions. The Soviets expected to occupy Linz per the Yalta agreements. Their maps show Linz squarely in the Soviet occupation zone, and now local Austrian officials are telling them that the Americans arrived first. The message is polite, diplomatic, but the undertone is clear. What are American forces doing in Soviet territory? Eisenhower drafts a response. It's careful, measured. He explains that Third Army pursued retreating German forces across the Enns River and secured Linz to prevent chaos during the final collapse of German resistance. He assures Tolbukhin that American forces will coordinate with Soviet command regarding final occupation zone boundaries. He doesn't mention that Patton never requested authorization for the advance. He doesn't mention that Patton is now fortifying positions around Linz. And he definitely doesn't mention that Patton has no intention of withdrawing. That afternoon, the situation gets worse. General George C. Marshall cables from Washington. President Truman is receiving formal protests from Soviet Ambassador Andrei Gromyko. Stalin himself has sent a message to Truman questioning American adherence to the Yalta agreements. Truman wants an immediate explanation. This is Truman's first major test in Allied coordination. Roosevelt negotiated Yalta. Roosevelt built the alliance. Truman has been president for 3 weeks. And now Stalin is asking if the United States keeps its agreements. Marshall's cable is direct. Resolve the Linz situation immediately. The president cannot afford a public confrontation with the Soviets days before Germany's surrender. Eisenhower reads the cable twice. Then he calls his staff together. What's Patton's current status? He asks. An intelligence officer steps forward with a map. Sir, Third Army has elements of the 11th Armored Division in and around Linz. They've also moved the 65th Infantry Division forward. Estimates put American strength in the Linz sector at approximately 23,000 troops, and the Soviets? The Red Army's 6th Guards Tank Army is 18 miles east of Linz. Marshal Konev is moving elements of the 4th Ukrainian Front south. We estimate 80,000 Soviet troops within 24 hours of Linz, sir. Eisenhower looks at the map. 23,000 Americans, 80,000 Soviets in peacetime Austria, with no clear orders about who withdraws. What's Patton do? The intelligence officer hesitates. Sir, according to reports from Third Army headquarters, General Patton has ordered defensive fortifications constructed around key positions in Linz. He's also moved additional units to secure roads leading to Salzburg. Defensive fortifications. Eisenhower repeats. Yes, sir. Eisenhower turns to Bedell Smith. He's digging in. Smith nods. It appears so, sir. Get me Churchill's staff. I need to know what London's position is on this. and find out if Truman has responded to Stalin yet. The staff disperses. Eisenhower stays at the map, staring at Linz. Patton isn't preparing to withdraw, he's preparing to stay. But Patton had already made his next move, and this one would bring Stalin himself into direct confrontation with American forces. May 6th. Patton's headquarters in Linz receives visitors, Austrian officials from the city administration. They're asking for American civil affairs support. Schools need to reopen, infrastructure needs repair, the local population needs food distribution organized. They're asking the Americans, and Patton says yes. By midday, Third Army has established military government offices in Linz. American civil affairs officers are coordinating with Austrian officials. The population of Linz, 180,000 people, is now under American administration. Eisenhower finds out through an intelligence summary that evening. He reads it twice, then sets it down on his desk. He established a military government, Eisenhower says to Smith. He's not occupying Linz. He's administering it. Yes, sir, Smith says. And there's more. Patton has moved units to secure Mauthausen. Eisenhower looks up Mauthausen, the concentration camp the Third Army liberated on May 5th. One of the worst camps the Allies have found. Tens of thousands of prisoners. Evidence of mass murder. Mauthausen is 15 miles east of the Enns, Smith continues. Technically in the Soviet zone per Yalta. Patton has positioned the 11th Armored to maintain control of the camp and surrounding area. Eisenhower is silent for a long moment. Mauthausen. If Third Army withdraws, the Soviets take control of the prisoners. The evidence. What's the Soviet reaction? Eisenhower asks. Smith pulls out another cable. Marshal Tolbukhin has sent a second communication. Soviet forces are requesting immediate American withdrawal to the Enns River line. They're calling the current situation an illegal occupation of Soviet territory. Illegal occupation, Eisenhower says quietly. Yes, sir. Eisenhower stands and walks to the window. Outside, Reims is quiet. The war is almost over. Germany is about to surrender, and his Third Army commander is in a standoff with the Red Army over Austria. Any incidents? Eisenhower asks. 2 reports of Soviet reconnaissance patrols encountering American positions. No shots fired, but tensions are high. Both sides are watching each other. Eisenhower turns back to Smith. Draft a withdrawal order. Third Army is to pull back to the Enns River within 48 hours. I'll sign it in the morning after I speak to Marshal. Smith nods. Yes, sir. And General Patton? Tell him I'm flying to Austria. I'll deliver the order personally. What Eisenhower didn't know yet was that Patton had already issued orders that would make withdrawal virtually impossible. That same evening, May 6th, Patton meets with his division commanders at his headquarters in Linz. The 11th Armored Division Commander, General Charles Kilburn, is there. So is Major General James Polk of the 65th Infantry Division. Patton spreads a map on the table. Gentlemen, Patton says, we're staying in Linz. Kilburn glances at Polk. Sir, Schaeff hasn't authorized. I don't care what Schaeff has or hasn't authorized. Patton interrupts. We took this ground. We're holding this ground. The Soviets want it? They can ask politely. General Polk says carefully, the Soviets have significant forces moving into the area. If they decide to press the issue, then we'll have a problem, Patton says. But that's their problem, not ours. We have the best defensive terrain between here and Berlin. We have the local population on our side, and we have Mauthausen. Those prisoners aren't going under Soviet administration. Not while I'm in command. Kilburn nods slowly. Understood, sir. What are your orders? Fortify every key position. I want defensive lines established on the roads leading into Linz from the east. Coordinate with civil affairs to integrate the local population. Make this, sir, Polk says. Eisenhower is going to order us to withdraw. Patton looks at him, probably. But it takes time to withdraw an army. Logistics. Coordination. Could take a week. Maybe longer. A lot can happen in a week. The division commanders exchange glances. They understand. Patton is buying time. One more thing, Patton says. No incidents with Soviet forces. If their patrols approach, be polite, professional, but don't move. Understand? Yes, sir. Both commanders. Patton nods. Good. Dismissed. After they leave, Patton's intelligence officer, Colonel Oscar Koch, approaches. General, Koch says quietly, this is going to create a crisis at the highest levels. I know, Patton says. That's the point. Sir? Patton looks at the map. At Linz, at the Soviet positions to the east, at the line that marks the Yalta Agreement boundary. We just spent 4 years defeating Germany, Patton says, and now we're going to hand half of Europe to the Soviets. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Hungary. All of it. And nobody in Washington or London seems to understand what that means. General Eisenhower understands the political situation. Eisenhower is a politician, Patton says. He has to be. I don't. My job is to win. And right now, winning means holding Linz. Koch is silent. They'll order me to withdraw, Patton continues. But until they do, we're here. And maybe, just maybe, someone in Washington will wake up and realize we're giving away everything we fought for. He walks to the window and looks out at Linz, at the Austrian city that isn't supposed to be under American control. Get some sleep, Oscar, Patton says. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. And then the Soviets made a move that changed everything. May 7th, 1945. Germany surrenders unconditionally. The war in Europe is officially over. General Alfred Jodl signs the instrument of surrender at 0241 hours in Rams. Eisenhower witnesses it. So does Marshal Georgy Zhukov for the Soviet Union. The Third Reich is finished. And now the Linz situation isn't a tactical problem during active combat. It's a pure political crisis. American and Soviet armies are facing each other in peacetime Austria, with no clear authority about who withdraws. The reports start coming in within hours of the surrender. Report from 11th Armored Division, local Austrian officials requesting American Civil Affairs Administration schools reopening under U.S. supervision. Population expressing relief at American presence. Soviet communicator chef, American forces illegally occupying Soviet zone, demanding immediate withdrawal to Enns River line per Yalta agreements. Report from Patton's headquarters, Third Army has established military government in Linz. Population 180,000 now under American administration. Civil order maintained. Intelligence summary, Soviet Marshal Konev moving 4th Ukrainian front units toward Linz. Estimated 80,000 Soviet troops within 24 hours of the city. Soviet reconnaissance patrols increasing frequency of contact with American positions. Eisenhower reads each report in his office. The war is over. Germany has surrendered, and he has an army commander occupying Soviet-designated territory without authorization. A cable arrives from Washington, from President Truman himself. The Soviet Union has fulfilled its obligations per Yalta agreements. We expect the United States to do the same. Resolve the Austria situation immediately. Stalin is questioning our commitment to Allied unity. Another cable. This one from Churchill. It's marked private and personal. Patton may be insubordinate, but he has secured a vital position. The Austrian people clearly prefer American administration to Soviet. I recommend we hold and negotiate from strength. However, I cannot say this publicly. The decision is yours and Truman. Eisenhower sets down both cables. Churchill supports Patton privately, but can't say so. Truman needs the crisis resolved before Stalin thinks America can't control its own generals. General Marshall cables need this solved before it becomes a public confrontation. Press is getting reports. Stalin is making this a test of Truman's credibility. Eisenhower calls his staff together. What's Patton's current status? He asks for the third time in 3 days. Sir, Third Army maintains positions in and around Linz. General Patton is at his forward headquarters in the city. Soviet forces are 12 miles east and holding position. Any incidents? 3 encounters between Soviet and American patrols. No shots fired, but both sides are dug in and watching each other. Eisenhower, we're 12 hours from an armed standoff with our own allies. Someone find me a solution that doesn't involve withdrawing or opening fire. Nobody has an answer. That evening, Eisenhower makes it. He's flying to Austria. He's going to Patton's headquarters, and he's going to resolve this face-to-face. He boards a C-47 transport at 0600 hours, May 9th. The flight takes 2 hours. Bedell Smith accompanies him. So does General Omar Bradley, Patton's immediate superior as commander of 12th Army Group. Bradley has been quiet through this entire crisis. Patton is his subordinate, but Bradley knows Patton, and Bradley knows this confrontation is inevitable. They land at a forward airstrip outside Linz. Patton is waiting. He's in full uniform. 2 pearl-handled revolvers on his belt. He salutes as Eisenhower steps off the plane. Welcome to Linz, sir, Patton says. Eisenhower returns the salute. We need to talk, George, now. They walk to a command tent. Maps on the table, reports stacked in corners. This is Patton's forward headquarters, the place he's been running his unauthorized occupation from. Eisenhower doesn't. Neither does Patton. George, Eisenhower says, and his voice is hard. I'm ordering you to withdraw to the Enns River. This comes from President Truman himself. Patton's jaw tightens. Ike, we both know what happens if we pull out. The Soviets move in. The same Austrians who greeted us as liberators get Soviet occupation. The survivors at Mauthausen get Soviet administrators. Is that what we won this war for? We won this war as allies, George. That includes the Soviets. We won this war, Patton says, his voice rising. And now we're handing half of Europe to Stalin on a silver platter. You know what he's doing in Poland, in Romania. You've read the intelligence reports. We're giving him Austria too? We just ended one war. You want to start another? I want to win the peace, not just the war. There's silence in the tent. Bradley is watching both men. Padel Smith stands by the entrance. Eisenhower walks to the map on the table. He stares at it at Linz, at the Enns River, at the line that marks the agreed boundary between American and Soviet zones. You're right, Eisenhower says quietly, about all of it. Patton looks at him. Stalin is taking everything we let him take, Eisenhower continues. The Austrian people would rather have us than the Red Army, and strategically, Linz matters. You're right. So we stay, Patton says. No, Eisenhower says, turning to face him. We withdraw to the Enns in 1 week. And during that week, we negotiate with the Soviets for a different occupation line. Negotiate, Patton says. With what leverage? With the leverage that we're currently occupying Linz, Eisenhower says. That's your leverage, George. You created it. Now I'm going to use it. Patton is silent. 1 week, Eisenhower says. I'll delay the withdrawal order for 1 week. That gives our diplomats time to negotiate with Moscow. If we can adjust the occupation line, we adjust it. If we can't, we withdraw. But we do it on our terms, not Stalin's. And if the Soviets refuse to negotiate, then we withdraw, Eisenhower says. Because the alternative is an armed confrontation with the Red Army in peacetime Austria. And that, George, is not an option. Patton walks to the map. He stares at it. At the city he sees without orders. At the ground his army holds. 1 week, he says finally. 1 week, Eisenhower confirms. Patton turns back to Eisenhower. His face is hard. His voice is controlled. Ike, I hope someone understands that we're on the eve of giving away the fruits of our victory to a potentially more dangerous enemy than the one we just defeated. The words hang in the air. Eisenhower doesn't respond immediately. He looks at Patton, at the general who just articulated what would become the Cold War. In May 1945, before anyone in Washington or London was ready to hear it. I understand, George, Eisenhower says quietly. I understand exactly what you're saying. Do you? Patton asks. Yes, and so does Churchill, and so does half the intelligence community. But understanding isn't the same as acting. We have agreements. We have alliances. We have a president who needs to build credibility with Stalin to manage the peace. And we have you, in Linz, without authorization, creating an international incident. I created an opportunity, Patton says. You created a crisis, Eisenhower counters, but you also gave us... So, I'm using it. 1 week. Withdrawal to the Enns on May 15th. That's final. Patton salutes. Understood, sir. Eisenhower returns the salute. Then he does something unexpected. He extends his hand. Patton takes it. You were right about the Soviets, George, Eisenhower says. Just so you know, you were right. They shake hands. Then Eisenhower turns and walks out of the tent. Bradley follows. Bedell Smith lingers for a moment. General Patton, Smith says quietly, for what it's worth, a lot of people at Chef agree with you. Patton nods, but they can't say it. No, sir, they can't. Smith leaves. Patton stands alone in the tent, looking at the map, at Linz, at the line he crossed without orders. This wasn't just insubordination. This wasn't tactical brilliance. This was Patton articulating the Cold War before it had a name. He saw the Soviet threat when official Allied policy was still cooperation. His unauthorized advance into Austria wasn't reckless. It was strategic foresight. Eisenhower couldn't publicly agree. But privately, he delayed the withdrawal. 6 days of negotiations between American and Soviet diplomats, 6 days of discussion about occupation zone boundaries. The final agreement adjusted the line. Not by much. But Mauthausen and parts of Upper Austria remained under American administration during the critical transition period. The Austrian population in those areas avoided immediate Soviet occupation, and the precedent was set for future negotiations about boundaries in occupied Europe. Patton gave Eisenhower leverage. Eisenhower used it. The system worked, but just barely. Third Army withdrew from Linz on May 15, 1945, not to the original Enns River line, but to the modified boundary negotiated during that week. The Soviets occupied Linz as planned, but the confrontation forced formal clarification of occupation zone boundaries that prevented future incidents. The statistics tell the story. Patton's unauthorized advance covered 80 miles in 48 hours. U.S. forces in Linz at peak strength numbered 23,000 troops. Soviet forces that would have occupied Linz without opposition numbered over 80,000. The duration of the standoff was 11 days. Casualties from the confrontation, 0. Though there were several very close calls. But the deeper story is what Patton saw. His diary entries from May 1945 read like predictions of the next 45 years. Soviet expansion, the Iron Curtain, the division of Europe. He wrote about it while official Allied policy was still built on cooperation with Stalin. Eisenhower, bound by political realities and the necessity of Allied unity, couldn't act on that foresight. But he didn't stop Patton immediately either. He delayed. He negotiated. He used the leverage Patton created. Years later, in his presidential memoirs, Eisenhower wrote about Patton and Austria. He wrote, "Patton's instincts about the Soviet Union were correct, even if his timing was impossible. He wanted to hold the line in Austria. Within 2 years, we were drawing lines all across Europe, trying to contain exactly what he predicted. 2 years after Linz, the Truman Doctrine would formalize American policy of Soviet containment. The Marshall Plan would rebuild Western Europe as a buffer against Soviet expansion. NATO would create a military alliance to counter the Red Army." Everything Patton warned about in May 1945 became official American policy by 1947. But in May 1945, he was alone. A general without orders, occupying a city he wasn't authorized to take, facing down an ally that would become an enemy. In December 1945, 7 months after the Linz incident, Patton was involved in a car accident in Germany. He died from his injuries on December 21st. To his death, he believed the wrong enemy had won the peace. The Cold War that followed proved him more right than wrong. And Austria, the country he seized without orders, became one of the few neutral zones where East and West could meet on equal terms, partly because of the precedent set in those chaotic 11 days in May 1945. The confrontation at Linz forced both sides to negotiate, to clarify boundaries, to establish protocols for occupation. The last entry in Patton's diary, written December 9, 1945, 12 days before his death, reads simply, "We defeated the wrong enemy." History would spend the next half-century debating whether he was right. This has been the story of what Eisenhower said when Patton secretly crossed into Austria without orders. A story of insubordination and foresight, of tactical brilliance and strategic vision, of a general who saw the future and tried to change it. If you found this story compelling, do us a favor, hit that subscribe button and join the WW2 Elite community. Tap the like icon to support the channel. And drop a comment below. What other untold World War II stories do you want us to cover? Your suggestions drive our content. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.